Hi there, my name is Dan Gunn, and welcome to this presentation on combustible dust. This is an introductory level presentation that is designed for a member of the general public. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the following 6 minutes. First of all, let's go over what you will get out of this presentation. By the end, you will be able to define combustible dust, list the industries affected by it, and explain an approach to evaluate the risks associated with it. So, let's go ahead and get started. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the United States defines combustible dust as a solid material composed of distinct particles or pieces, regardless of size, shape, or chemical composition, which presents a fire or deflagration hazard when suspended in air or some other oxidizing medium over a range of concentrations. Still not clear on the definition? Consider this then. Imagine you have a pile of wood dust in your garage from a home carpentry project and you sweep the dust off with your hand. The dust that stays airborne is combustible dust, whereas the dust that falls immediately to the floor is not. Okay, but why is combustible dust a problem? I know that it is flammable, but so are a lot of things. To get a better idea, let's compare combustible dust to the risk of igniting gasoline vapors. Most of us face this risk daily, as evidenced by the no smoking signs we see at gas stations when we are refueling our vehicles. When ignited, gasoline vapors expand to 7 to 8 times their original volume. Combustible dust, on the other hand, when ignited, expands to 20 times its original volume. The image on the screen shows just how easily a small amount of combustible dust can quickly consume a human being, causing serious injury and/or death. To give you an idea of what can happen in an industrial setting, on April 18, 2006, at Tefisa Canada's Lac Mégantic particle board plant, a spark in one of its production lines caused a combustible dust explosion that destroyed the production line, which resulted in a 10% shutdown of North America's particle board production. So where can I find combustible dust? It can be found in any industry that generates dust. For instance, grain elevators, food production, chemical manufacturing, metal processing, coal-fired power plants, and wood processing facilities, which we will use as the example for this lesson. Combustible dust comes in two different types, primary and secondary. Primary combustible dust accumulates at the location of a dust-producing activity. Looking at the photo on your screen, you can see the primary dust sitting on, beside, and underneath the log saw. Secondary combustible dust, on the other hand, becomes airborne and can settle far away from where it was generated. In a sawmill, you can find secondary dust, among other locations, on horizontal surfaces such as on the tops of junction boxes and electrical switches, as shown by the image on your screen. In order for combustible dust to ignite, 5 elements are required: ignition, confinement of dust clouds, such as a dust cloud occurring inside a room or a large building, oxygen in the air, the dispersion or suspension of dust particles in the air, and last, the combustible dust itself. Once combustible dust has ignited, there is a primary explosion which causes a shock wave. This shock wave can then cause any secondary dust within range that has settled on horizontal surfaces to be disturbed or dispersed in the air. This in turn causes it to be ignited, which results in a subsequent explosion. This secondary explosion results in another shock wave, which in turn disperses even more secondary combustible dust into the air, causing yet another explosion. You can see then how quickly an initial ignition of combustible dust can lead to a runaway series of explosions, resulting in severe injuries, loss of life, and damage to property. So now that you understand the damage that combustible dust can cause and what happens in a combustible dust explosion, let's learn how to evaluate the danger posed by accumulations of combustible dust. To do this, it is helpful to look at how ignition potential and propagation potential affect the risk level. Ignition potential is simply the potential for a fuel, such as combustible dust, to ignite. Sources of ignition in a mill can include hot work, such as welding or grinding, heat-generating processes, such as friction or a drive wheel for a conveyor, or spark-generating equipment, electric motors, and junction boxes. Propagation potential is the probability that an initial explosion will spread to other areas. Factors to consider include proximity and size of any primary or secondary dust that would become dispersed in air from an initial explosion. Also, flammability of the surrounding infrastructure and equipment, such as wood versus concrete walls, also affects propagation potential. We can then plot ignition potential and propagation potential to evaluate the risk posed by combustible dust in a given situation. We can see then that as we increase the ignition and propagation potential, we quickly move from a low risk to a high risk situation. To better understand, let's take a look at a couple of scenarios. Looking at the photo on your screen, you can see there is some primary dust located underneath the blue conveyor support structure, as well as some secondary dust located on the electric motor. As there is only one ignition source and no other accumulations of combustible dust in the mill, this situation would be considered low risk. In this scenario, it is evident there are significant accumulations of secondary dust on the roof trusses, which, given an initial explosion, would become dispersed in air and then ignited, thus creating a high probability that an initial explosion would travel quite quickly throughout the mill. As such, this situation would be considered high risk. This brings the PechaKucha on combustible dust to a close. Hopefully you have an appreciation for the danger posed by combustible dust and can give a definition of combustible dust, list the industries that are affected by combustible dust, and describe an approach to assessing the danger posed by it in the workplace. Thank you for listening.